To start with, I don't like social practice. I tend to use socially engaged art because I feel like social practice is such a general term, and I feel like it's important to reclaim the word art for several reasons. But I feel much more comfortable using socially engaged art. And the more I learn about it, the more I feel like definitions are slippery and are not very useful. Like when trying to define what it is. And every time I try to define it, it takes me like 10 minutes. You know, I can't make it shorter. And mainly because most people are not familiar with it, and they need a lot of context and explanation about where it's coming from. So I don't know if what I'm going to tell you it's a definition, but I feel like there are two things that, and this is just speaking from a very personal experience in philosophy. I feel like there are two things that I feel like socially engaged art is very useful, or like could be, or like two main things that are very important. And one is just kind of reclaiming art as a tool for producing knowledge. I feel like that's a very important thing about it, that you know, as art became isolated into the market and into very specific institutions and got isolated from life, it stopped fulfilling his role as a discipline, and as a discipline that produces knowledge. So for me, socially engaged art or social practice is a way to just reclaim that function. You know, art produces knowledge, and if it does, it has to be inserted in every single aspect of life and in every single institution. And so that's been one of the very important things for me in terms of defining it. And I feel like the other one is also just kind of reevaluating the social function of art. Just as society changes, and it changes so quickly and so dramatically everywhere, like how we are responding as artists to those changes, and just what kind of social function it fulfills. And I feel like that's not kind of an easy answer. I feel like there are many different ways in which we respond, and sometimes social tends to be confused with political, and I feel like social is way broader than that. So when I think about social function, I'm not thinking about social justice or a social movement. I'm thinking about just the social as just a function of us living in society, and how do we as artists respond to that. So those are two things that I am kind of using to define this practice. Like at least in Portland, for example, we have a very strong resistance to the creation of objects, for example, right? There is an opposition to creation of objects, which I feel it's not productive, because I feel like objects happen and can be a manifestation of this work, but they have to be mediums. They can't be the end of the work. And sometimes it can be. I guess it just depends on the specific kind of work you're doing and what manifestation it needs to take. So if it's an object, it's fine. And if it's not, it's fine too. But it's not the goal to produce an object, but it happens, and it can be very useful. So I feel like it depends where you're working is what kind of response you get about the function of objects and object making and object producing. I do feel like it's important to reclaim the word art, because I also feel like it's getting very confusing with artists starting to work in other disciplines. And for me, and this is kind of a belief I have, if I'm going to be doing this from the perspective of us artists, I have to be contributing something. So for example, if I am somebody who's interested in anthropology or environmental work, I have to do things. If I'm going to be doing from the place of an artist, I have to be doing things that are at least slightly different than the way an anthropologist, an environmental person does. And the way I believe this is for two reasons. One, it's an issue of responsibility and accountability, because I feel like we have to be respectful towards people who, went to years for school and have been studying other disciplines for years, and we have to be respectful about that knowledge, and that commitment to those disciplines, and not pretend that we are actually anthropologists, because I just feel like that's kind of irresponsible, would be really irresponsible. But also I feel because it has to go two ways. So if I'm going to be doing something, and I'm going to use this anthropology example, that if I'm going to be like going in and taking methodologies or ways of working from anthropology, I feel like I have to do it in a way that the anthropologists on the other side are like, oh, I never thought about that. I never thought that it could be done that way. Or that I am, and this is the whole thing about producing knowledge. I'm producing knowledge for them, right? So I'm just not taking, but I'm also giving something, which it's something I find problematic with a lot of the work that's being produced, is that a lot of artists, I feel like, are just being comfortable doing community work the way that all the community-based organizations do, right? And I feel like we have to contribute something, because if we are artists, if we're going to call ourselves artists and do this as art, it has to be producing some sort of knowledge that those community-based organizations are not producing, right? So for me, that part is very important, to just reclaim that word art, and that's why I feel more comfortable using socially engaged art, because then I feel like I am reclaiming the fact that we are good at something as artists, and a lot of times that's appealing to the imagination, or like introducing aesthetics into work. So I feel like and it's also a matter of responsibility for me too, right? If I'm going to respond to society, I'm going to do it in the best way I do, and if the best way I do is being an artist, then I have to be very aware of that, and of the gift that I'm doing.